in the meantime.
Good morning and good day to everyone. Welcome to the webinar Keeping Comprehensive Employee Records Effortlessly, 1st of February 2024 by ClearHR, a global HR software which helps in automating your HR processes. My name is Neha Berry and I'm the HR Solution Consultant at ClearHR. Thank you for joining the live event today. We are happy to have you here. So please take a moment and get comfortable before we begin the agenda. First on the list is the introduction to comprehensive employee records. Next are the challenges we'll address in traditional record keeping. Following that, we have the modern solutions and the best practices in employee record management, which help in making the records more user-friendly, organized, and secure. Lastly, we have the success strategies, where we will share the tips, practical tips, and implementing the discussed solutions in your organization. So please use the question box to ask the questions during and at the end of the webinar to make it more fun and interactive. So now let me take a moment and appreciate our distinguished panelists for the live event today. Introducing Stephanie, she's a seasoned leader. She's an ex-CHRO and an HR consultant. On the professional front, she's highly skilled and natural in her aspects, and her expertise just not talks about interpreting calculations, but also has a strong financial acumen in creating and managing budget development and the seamless design and implementation of the IT systems. Automation is her forte. And on the personal front, my 30-minute meeting was more than enough to describe me, that she has the capability to think out of the box, and I was impressed by the way she handled her work. So welcome on board.
Hi, everyone.
Okay.
So great to hear you, Stephanie.
Stephanie, if you mind, shed some light on your career.
Oh, yes, sure. So, folks, I was the Chief Human Resources Officer and Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for the Congressional Budget Office from, up until 2022, when I retired and decided to go into consulting. And so now I help human resources teams in a variety of different organizations do a lot of different projects and work. And one of the things, as Neha just said, is I love automation. I think that every single day we are expected to do more and more in our work in human resources, and there's no way to keep up unless we take a lot of attention and focus it on how to automate our processes.
Okay, thank you for joining us and taking out your time. Okay, next on the panelist is Doreen Baffo. She's the lead coach and CEO at Branch Out Africa. She's a naturally skillful person. Her skill set includes training delivery, leadership development, and stakeholder engagement. Her career has deep rooted in sales, service, and people development. Buzz goes around. She's naturally a people person, and she has that helps seeing other people succeed. She's that helping. She has that people can rely upon her. So thank you for joining us tonight. And you can also share some things with us.
Oh, sure. All right. So the aspect of human capital that I enjoy the most is actually talent development. So although I'm a practicing human resource practitioner, I like to stay in my forte, which is talent development. But I find joy in working with senior execs on engaging their teams on performance management and just getting people to lead from a place of legacy and vision. So that's what I do.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Doreen.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine.
Next on the list is Dr. Aminda Aurora. He's the co-founder and CEO at ClearHR.
I think Neha, probably the easiest thing I can say about myself, the other stuff is not so important, is that my pleasure is working with great people like Stephanie and Doreen here. This is probably the biggest privilege, and one of the things that I say about like my job here at ClearHR is really that opportunity to work alongside great people, great leaders, great executives, and really understand what are the business outcomes that they're trying to derive and how the HR system can actually help us. I know my bio is there. That's probably not so much like the exciting part. I think the really interesting part for me is, and I've had the opportunity and the privilege of working alongside Stephanie and Doreen for 4 years. So I think that's really been my, my pleasure.
All right.
Equally.
Okay, moving on to next. I'll hand over it to Stephanie.
So what we're going to focus on here today is records, employee records, and this is an important key component of all of our work that we do. If we don't have the information available to do the work that we need, then we can't succeed at what we're trying to accomplish. And that means things like vital records, personal details, work history, evaluation, compensation, education, development, those kinds of things. And so having this information available is super important. And so beyond just being a repository for information, these data help us to make decisions and also help us to stay in compliance with the law and also mitigate risks and liabilities. And so it's super important that we have these things together. And all of this is possible in many different ways, but automation through HRIS is super important and makes it much easier to do the things that we need to do to get the results that we need.
And super happy, Stephanie, that you brought in the regulatory and compliance bits of it, because sometimes somehow we seem to, we get into the mindset that we're just keeping records for keeping safe. But especially if you work in a regulated sector, it's extremely important to have those records up to date, reviewed at particular times, so that anytime the compliance officers walk in, you have what you need to keep your license to trade.
Right, absolutely.
So as we go along, yeah, let's go to the next slide, Neha. But sorry, go ahead, and then I'll add. I wanted to add something. I'll add it later.
So as I mentioned before, the challenges of record keeping is that they're quite abundant, right? So if you think about all of the things that when I first went to CBO in, well, many decades ago, we had an entire wall of cabinets and floor to ceiling. We had to stand on a ladder to get to the higher parts of them. And it was all in paper, and it was super important information, but it wasn't accessible. And so that's a pretty big challenge of making sure that you have the data that you need to use and the records that you need to use. So the important things are data accessibility, as I just mentioned, security and access. That's super important, and I have a good example to talk about that in a second. Collaboration and integration. So if I have the information and I'm having to completely duplicate it and send it off to someone else, that's not very efficient. As I just mentioned, space and storage concerns, compliance challenges, as Doreen referred to. It's hard to analyze if it's not if it's in paper, and then as you grow and records become more important, or you have to keep more records, that becomes important as well. I was on Capitol Hill during 9/11, and we were we had to leave our offices immediately, as you might recall, because we were evacuated. And we set up shop outside of our offices on 9/11, and then went back to our offices, and shortly thereafter had to evacuate our offices again because of the anthrax attack. And we had issues of, people died who were their beneficiaries. They were all in our building and not accessible. And so accessibility and those kinds of things are super important. And that's one of the reasons that we evolved toward looking more at systems and efficiencies. Doreen, do you have any kind of examples or things that might address this?
Absolutely, Stephanie. And I like the example that you shared from the beginning, because when I joined corporate Ghana a couple of years ago as well, one of the first things that I was taught by one of the senior leaders in administration back then was how to file away documents, and it seemed like such a beautiful skill to have back then, but the world has so moved on, getting access to data. I also have had a scenario where we lost an employee, unfortunately, and unfortunately, in our case, their records were not updated. So we had what they had used as their initial beneficiary, but life had changed for them. And so we reached out immediately to who was supposed to be their beneficiary back then. But the other person on the other end was really kind enough to say, actually, our marriage ended a couple of years ago. I know he was with someone else. Check this number and reach out to his family members on this. And that's how we navigated that scenario. But it's important not only to have the records in the right place, but also to have them updated. And it's one of the important things that we need to do in our line of work to be compliant and to provide the kind of bespoke services that we want to provide in the human capital space.
I think all of those are great examples of like how the data needs to be accessible. Another part, Stephanie, that you touched upon, just to build it out a little further, many times we see, even today, even 2024, that the data is being replicated in systems. When we walk into the door, when the customer sort of explaining to us, think how it is, they're replicating it because this data now needs to be used by another team, and they're not able to give partial access to the data. Saying, hey, you have this data, just give them the partial access. No, they said we can't do that because we have to either give all or nothing, and we cannot give all, so give them nothing. So give them an extract that they have to then house it somewhere. So these kinds of challenges are present even today. They're not even, they haven't gone. And luckily we have, Stephanie and Doreen, who have extensive experience going back years, but some of these challenges are still there even today. That's interesting to hear. Yeah. But anyway, let's continue on.
Yeah, and with that example, so for me, I mean, just last year in 2023, December, my unit was audited because I work in a regulated space, but the internal audits department needed to do, just in line with the directives of the board, to do an audit of our practices, selection, learning and development. And it was just a joy not having to send files to them, to say, okay, this is the access, you go check what we have and come back. And they gave a very beautiful report about their work with us. And the chief audit gentleman said it's the first time that they had experienced something like that. I was like, ooh, go girl. So yeah, it pays to, challenges notwithstanding, there are lots of there are beautiful ways to work around those challenges, and I hope that during this webinar we're able to cover some of those beautiful ways to update and keep our records intact.
Yeah. Okay. And do you want me to get mention this one here? So just to start with this part here. So inside one of the main things that ClayCHR brings to the table essentially is the core employee record. And like Stephanie said at the beginning, as the simplest of the simplest feature this might be, this is a complete bedrock of your HR system. So a lot of times when people are thinking about an HR system in 2024, there are a lot more exciting things that people are thinking about. Oh, do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have? And one of the things that I often see a customer during the pre-sales time to the post-sales implementation time, the focus immediately shifts to that, because pre-sales time, people are talking about all the features of the Maserati. They're like, I want this Lamborghini, there's all this. And of course, the good thing is for us is to say, yes, we have that. Let me show you how to do this thing. But as soon as the implementation starts, suddenly this becomes the core bedrock to say, hey, first of all, we need to get this right. And I'm like, yes, we're right. Let's get this right first. So one of the things that ClayCHR brings to the table is that you have your core comprehensive employee record with a lot of details about it. You call it a 360-degree record because you can really view it from any different angle. The amount of data elements in that is quite comprehensive. We don't need to go through all of them, but from your simplest of the starting points to say what the person's tenure history was, addresses, dependents example that Doreen just mentioned, emergency context to see that these things have, identity numbers if we still have them. So all of those things, and as well as the evolution history of it. Where did the person used to before they joined this organization? What are the documents that they have signed? And this becomes that central place where prior to having a comprehensive employee record, perhaps this information is scattered around in many different systems, in many different places, and that becomes one of the key initiatives. The key benefits of having the system is that you pull all these things together here so that you can slice and dice this for different people, give them access on the same system. You don't have to then not give them access because you cannot give them access to everything here. So that's the main thing that we'll be discussing today. This is just a little bit of that in a nutshell. I'm sure Doreen, Stephanie, you guys are very familiar with some screen like this. Of course, inside ClayChart systems is configurable, but I think as I see this thing, this is at least is one central record that kind of shows them. Yeah.
Absolutely. I like the fact that when it comes to Clay in that space, you can actually customize it. And then the fact also that you can include or employ solicit the help of your colleagues to go and populate their own data. And when the organization is thinking anything else, you can build. So for instance, in using this system, have built customized portions where if there's a conversation around discipline and hearing, line managers can go in there and populate that on health benefits. It's there. You can go in there and add your dependents and how you want to apportion that. So for me, in addition to having a system or using the system, it's important that the system is customizable and you can expand it in any way that you want it to go.
Exactly. So Neha, let's launch the poll here. And while people are attending to the poll, responding to the poll here, I did want to mention a couple of other things as well. So your poll should be on here. And Stephanie, did you say something? Because I don't think if I heard you at that moment. At least I didn't hear Stephanie. So let me just read out this question here, and then I wanted to add one more thing as well here. So here, the quick poll here is just to say what is the biggest challenge that you face? Either it's time-consuming manual data entry or difficulty locating, concerns about data security that we talked about, just the general inefficiency or lack of integration. So let's give people 20-30 seconds to quickly respond to this question here. You just have to make one choice. But one thing I did want to mention here that Doreen was just talking about, that in ClayChart, one of the things that you can do is that you can farm out this work of collecting the data, and that can work in a variety of different ways. The custom fields is, let's suppose you create some extension fields, which we'll talk about again in a minute here. You can give the permissions to that in a variety of settings. You can say this particular user group is the one managing it, so that way they can come in and they can enter the data, while this custom field, some other group is managing it. So you kind of segregate that. Secondly, you can create forms to collect the data, and the forms data flowing through to the employee record. So again, a few different ways to do that, but the core idea there is that if you have the employee record, then you're going to be able to, distribute the work of collecting that information here. So I think maybe people have had chance to respond to it. So if you're going to give them a few more seconds here, Neha, and then we can close out the poll and see the results here.
Okay, let's close the poll. And the results are here.
Okay, that's interesting. So about 36% people are saying essentially it's time-consuming manual data entry. And another 36% are saying the inefficiency in updating. And then 20% people saying roughly. So Doreen, do these results kind of match to what you might expect?
Absolutely. And I guess even in our opening conversation, that's one of the things we spoke about when you mentioned the pre-sales requirements and people asking for the superb features. But when it comes to getting, when the rubber hits the road, it's actually having the data. And when you have the data seated across different places or files, that becomes really time consuming to now build that initial records place. But if you look at the inefficiencies, it's something that I can relate to, in that once we get the initial work done, without a regular audit, even within the people and culture space or the human resource space by the team themselves, then what you have is data that you cannot utilize because things have changed. And so what I would say for human resource practitioners to do would be to have it as part of their periodic functions within their department to audit their own records and update it. The beauty of using a system like HR is that you can solicit colleagues to do it by themselves and just upload evidence in the system that you can audit and sign off, and then have the system updated.
Exactly. So let's do this thing. I think then, Neha, if we proceed on, let's kind of show the audience what are some of the key components that we do see here, because I think that's where we'll kind of try to make sure that everybody has a shared understanding of what we mean by employee record, because otherwise people could have and I think while we're discussing this further, we should make sure that we are all talking about the same thing here. So the employee record, this is not at all an exhaustive list, rather just trying to show different things that can be included in it. The core employee information, the standard fields, the extension fields, the documentation that can include specific contracts that they've signed in the PDF form, anything that you've had to scan and upload, whatever it is. Plus, you can also include any of the forms that they've had filled out over time. So any form history that you have there, whether they were web forms or whatever, is here. Another interesting thing I come across this, I don't want to go down the forms rabbit hole. I know we've had the webinars on the issue of forms only, but still I'll just mention this here. Inside Clay HR, in general, talking about an HR system, their customers, of course, people are very familiar with Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, etc., etc. People are already using them for collecting the data. So two kinds of things we see, right? Somebody who looks at a Clay HR form saying, oh, okay, that's great. Then I don't have to do that in Google. But somebody else poses the vice versa question to us, saying, oh, if I can already do this in Google, why would I do that here? Because they're already comfortable. So it's the same exact observation people make two different ways. And to that, I say the simple thing here. Really do whatever works for you. But if you keep the data inside Clay HR, the forms experience is what it is. It's something very similar across these three different, and besides, there are hundreds of other form building solutions out there too, not to take away anything from them. But if you build in Google Forms or in Microsoft Forms or in Clay HR Forms, there are a couple of different ways. Firstly, in Clay HR, when you build out a form, then you say, okay, this form goes here, then goes to finance. That means that the finance user group is already well defined inside Clay HR. That means it'll go to that. If you do that in Google Forms, then you have to then set that up there while this helps you. So there are a few different, and then who the person's manager is, that relationship is well known here. The person's job title is well known here, so it can pre-fill it. If you want to backfill the data, so the data in, data out, you can kind of do. So the same observation, people make in two different ways, but what I recommend to that is that, okay, if the Clay HR forms are going to help you, they're going to be a big value add. And because forms are such a flexible entity, and we are all of us in HR, we love forms. We wake up. Sometimes I feel like I wake up and I start thinking about, ooh, what kind of form am I going to design?
Okay, you're scaring me, Aminda.
At least I think about, like, that must be the case. No, that doesn't happen to me actually, but I think that must be what other HR people are doing, because there are so many forms. I'm like, if you count how many forms there are, when did you design all these forms? But of course there are all these forms. So like there's a big forms library, to the point that in Clay HR over a couple of years ago, we had to build out something because people wanted the forms organization capability. So there are so many forms that the forms are now organized in folders. And then this thing, I'm like, so when you have to build out forms in folders, that tells you there must be, like, oh, that's a requirement. Oh, I didn't realize. So
well, So one of the things that I know we're joking about this, but the thing that I think is helpful for me was that if we do it all in one system, we only have to deal with the changes and the nuances of that one system, right? So if you've built this form in Google Docs and Google Docs changes, then you have to go and deal with the changes in Google Docs. Then you have to figure out if that affects your flow in, Clay HR or anything like that. If you just keep it all in one place, then it's easier to manage that. The other thing is, and this goes a little bit back to what you were saying a second ago on a previous slide, was my big concern when I was managing my HR team is that I didn't want my team to be a data entry hounds. I mean, I didn't want somebody sitting there doing data entry for hours and hours and hours and hours. It didn't make any sense. It's not a fun job. I don't want that job. And so being able to bifurcate that or quadruplicate it or how many ever times was really helpful. So when we set up, as Doreen said earlier, you can set up sections for customization for different rules. So the people who are in charge of security set up security, and they put in the badge numbers, and they put in the access that they had, and they put in the security clearances they had from the CIA and the State Department. And so we didn't have to worry about that, and we didn't care about that stuff, right? We just needed to know that they had their security clearance so they could be in the system, that they had a badge so they could come into the office and get where they needed to go. And so I thought that was really helpful in this system.
Right. So, and just going along the same lines here, that the lot of the other work that the employee does, whether it's the leave tracking, goals tracking, the performance reviews, feedback, skills learning, that's all part of the extended. In a way, looking at the one employee is a sort of fractal way of looking at the entire HR system, because ultimately everything in the HR system is going to affect, indirectly affect an employee. So if you collect all the data here, it's going to do, and of course the comp and benefits piece is a big piece here. And inside, just for people who do use the comp management capability in Clay HR, to be able to build out a comp proposal in bulk and then to distribute it for approvals across different layers, and then so that once the comp proposal is then executed, then you have changed the compensation for all the 130 people who were part of that package. That's a big thing, and then eventually it shows up in. So that might be the process that you execute that with, but eventually it shows up in the employee record. So from the employee records piece here, even though there are other modules and applications and like performance review and other things that you launch and you take care of there, but eventually the data flows into the employee record and you have to hold it there. So if somebody were to ask you, saying, hey, what was this person's merit rating in 2021 and what was the percentage increase that was given to them, you can kind of quickly just go back and refer to it there. You don't even, at that time, you may not even care about what was the details of the performance review process that was followed, on who filled out the first form, on who filled out the second form. Okay, well, that might be here. We can go into that by following that link. But at the summary, you already have that here. I think that becomes a key part here as well. And like Doreen, I'm sure you see that this is not an exhaustive list, but good enough for people to kind of think about, hey, there's a lot going to be here that we have to sort of manage, as well as then that we can leverage in our other business outcomes there.
Absolutely. And for me, the fact that it's also available to different employees at different levels within the organization builds trust and transparency. So yeah, important that we have this and we have a system that allows for that kind of transparency.
Yeah, and talking about transparency, yes, we don't see on the slide here, but the audit history of the employee record changes is a big thing too. So the fact that you can go into the employee record and click on the audit history, so you can see, okay, this was changed, then this person changed this. Here was this person added to this group, here was a person removed from the group, all of that, those are big things too. So Neha, let's do this thing. As we go to the next slide, just in interest of time here, let's skip the one poll here. Let's go right into, because I think there's a lot more material we have to cover. Let's go right into this part here. Sorry, the previous one here. That's the slide 13. I think Stephanie, if you would like, we can cover here because I think there's a lot of material to cover.
Sure. Yeah, this is important because as systems have evolved, they've become more robust and have more capabilities in them, and it's super important that we do this. So one of the things that's key for us was security, right? So PII, personally identifiable information, and other confidential information is really important to keep close. Having it accessible in super in mobile apps, in all systems all at once, that's really important. Integrating your HRIS with other systems, I think we talked about this in the pre-call, and Rinder, that my previous team, that the HRIS system is the system of record. So when your name is in there, even though your name is Stephanie Ruiz, but you go by Maria, your legal name is in the system, and it flows through to all the things. So the people in the finance group who are paying your taxes and those kinds of things are getting the information from the system of record. Data security was super important, and particularly for me. So being able to segregate who has access to this information. Sometimes it's a little daunting when you're the super user, the HR, the Chiro, and you have you open it up and you're like, oh my gosh, there's an employee ID, there's a social security number, there's a date of birth, and then you realize that a lot of people have access to the system, but you as an HR professional can decide who needs access to what. So yes, security needs access to the date of the birth to make sure that when they put in their top secret clearance request that those things match. But finance doesn't need the date of birth. They don't need to know that information. There's a whole bunch of other things that you can just segregate and keep in line with what the importance is. Also, it's backed up, right? So we don't have to worry about if something happens, the system crashes, we've lost all this information, or if there's a fire, the building's gone, the paper's gone, the hard drives are gone, whatever. This is all available in the cloud, and this kind of gets to the customization and the scalability, right? So it doesn't matter if we have 20 employees or 220 employees or 2,020 employees. It doesn't really matter because the system can do all of these things, and you don't have to replicate things or create new things for each new group. And then analytics and reporting, so important to be able to go in and say, what was our average increase last pay period? What was our what's our average age for each group if we're looking at succession planning? And what's our average tenure? Oh, how long, what's the average tenure of people? Are we starting to see turnover more in people in 0 to 5 years, 0 to 3 years, 0 to 10 years? What do we need to do? There's so many analytics that you can use to address kind of the strategic aspects of HR that you couldn't do easily without this kind of a system, because all of this is able to be downloadable. Doreen, I'm sure you have a ton of other examples of things that are important within these modern solutions.
Yes, but I think you've covered quite almost all of it. For me, I think I just highlight on the customization and extensibility, which are the two areas that I think I love the most, especially because things keep changing, and from a strategic perspective, you want to be able to give bespoke people solutions in the organization. Again, in the gig economy where you have the new generation wanting to do particular things at particular times and want to go off, and then they want to be able to, they want a bouquet of benefits that they want to select from. It's important that you have a system that supports that. So a system that you can customize to meet your needs, a system that that allows for extension, but also one that integrates with other systems so you can deliver on your objectives. So I think you've covered all of that, Stephanie, and ClearHR helps do that.
So I think let's do this thing, Neha, then let's launch the poll question 3, because we have a couple of more important points to make here as well. So let's go ahead and launch the next poll here. So I think here the question we're posing to the audience is, for the implementation of these enhanced employee records, how do you think we can streamline the process here? What are some of those enabling features here, whether they are the UI, the enhanced security, the automation of the data flow, whether it's improved accessibility or the integration here. So let's give audience a quick 20 seconds here to vote, and then we'll continue along here.
One of the things I think we haven't talked about on accessibility is how that providing access to needed information to other teams and groups saves your HR team time, right? So you might have to run a report to give it to finance, or run a report to give it to the administrative group. Now you can just say, you know, they can just get whatever it is that they need. They can run their own reports, and so I think that helps a lot to take away the burden from HR.
Absolutely.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely.
So let's wrap up the poll here. But I think that point of reports is exactly spot on. And even within that, we see tons of reports being scheduled. So Stephanie, just to your point here, we see a lot of reports that are even scheduled. So people have access to the reports, but they don't even they don't even have to come into the system to, you know, to oh, I think you've stopped the poll. Yeah. So they don't even have to. Okay, here we see the results here. They don't even have to come into the system and run it. They'll just receive the email every Wednesday morning, so they can kind of do their meeting with that information. Okay, let's see the results here. So a good 35% just talk about the UI, which is great. Automation features, integration capabilities, another 30% together. Accessibility 24%, and the security always on top of people's mind, I guess, 12% here. So I would say that these results are pretty well and expected here, right, Doreen?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, for me, UI, I think it's one of my key considerations in selecting any human resource management software in the first place, because if you think about it, like Stephanie said, you want to free your team from data entry and running reports and all of that. So the UI helps for you in making that decision, because once a system, it's very friendly. The interface is user friendly, is simple, but delivers on what it's supposed to deliver on. Then it's a win for you as a leader of the team to get people to adopt it and to use it. You know, if I need to learn a software to be able to do basic things, then let HR do their thing so that I can focus on my work. But if the interface is really easy to use and friendly, and it's really it gives you cues on its own, then it's yeah, it's easy to onboard people, to support, and to enter their own data when necessary.
Anyhow, while we go to the next slide here, the point that the UI, sorry, the previous one, I think. Yeah, here. The point about UI is, sorry, I think we are on the wrong slide here.
Here we go. Do you want me?
This is good. This is good. Thank you. So the point about UI is especially spot on, because one of the things we see, I know Stephanie, you were also going to mention something. I'll quickly mention that within the HR, and this is not different from a lot of other departments, but it's probably, if it's true, it's especially true for HR, that you certainly have to cater to a very, very, very big disparity between where people are going to be in at. They're going to be super users, superheroes, you know, super people like Stephanie, who can do everything and then do some more, and then Doreen, you know, and they're also going to be people who are going to be saying, hey, this system's very daunting. This is my first time. I'm here, and we want them to feel welcome too. That hey, they've just joined the HR. If we show them something that's just so complicated that, you know, it drives them away from that career, from that beautiful career that could be, that's not we're not doing ourselves or anybody else's service here. So we have to. So the system has to cater to somebody who is using the system for the very first time. And I'm sure that many of the audience members can relate with that as well. Or if they cannot relate with it just imagine when you just joined a few years ago, where you were. And then of course, then people who want to be able to go into all the advanced settings and all the nooks and crevices, that's perfectly fine. So I'm sure that Stephanie and Doreen have popped open the advanced button way too many times, so they know that those are some more things behind it. But at the same time, listen, no, this somebody else comes in and say, yeah, this is fine. I did that. This is good enough. It's good. So it has to sort of cater to a range of capabilities there.
Sure.
Exactly.
And Stephanie,
So
I think you were going to say something, and I did interrupt you at the time.
No, it's fine. I was going to say that sometimes what we have made the system, or the system has made our lives so much easier that we've forgotten. So I forgot, Aminda, that the reports just come to me, and that's the beauty of it. They just show up. This slide is really important in that it shows how we can add fields and groups and access to those fields. And I think that was one of the real beauties of Clay, because none of our organizations is the same. You may track tools that you give to your employees. You may track countries that they're in. You may track markets that they cover. You may track their sales specialties. And not everybody is going to do that. And that's one of the beauties of this system. And most systems have customizations, but I will say that my experience with Clay was after 2 other systems, one of which we abandoned in implementation, I'm sorry to say. And being able to do this and be able to provide these things that make it very specific to your organization is so helpful. And I love this feature.
Here I'll mention one thing, that being able to add custom fields, and this might be because I looking at the audience here, I know that this might be sort of repeating something they already know, but this still could be funny. Of course, people know in Claychar you can add custom fields, custom groups, custom tables. Not only that, this part might, if you're not familiar with it, you can actually report off of all of them. So when you report off of this thing, you can add custom fields to report. And not only that, in the custom tables, you go into the table in the report, pick the custom table, and you can report off of that. And if you use APIs, these are all included in the API too. So when we say that this is the extensibility and the configurability, and this additions are the first-class citizens, what we mean is that when you add a new custom field, it is as good as a standard field. You can then control your access to it. You can report off of it. You can include it in the API for both in and out, because your third-party systems are going to be dependent on it. So still, many times I hear, especially in the pre-sales meeting or sales meeting, sometimes people will ask this question: "Oh, I see that you can create a custom field. Can you report off of it?" And I say yes. Or can you include that in the API? I say yes. So if I got a dime every single time people ask me that question, I'll be a very rich man. But if I got a dime every single time they said, "Oh, our HR system can also do that," I would be broke, because it just seems to be that somehow people who are building that, they've forgotten that if you create a custom field, you show it in the UI, it's not good enough if people cannot report off of it and cannot include that into the API. So just in case you're using some of those features, that's great, you're already aware. But in case you're not, just be aware, you can always report off of it, and that should be a central thing. Ultimately, you're including that custom field so you can do something with your, to power some of the other decisions that you are making for your business outcomes. So yes, you can report off of it, and if you include the API based on the security settings that you have given to that custom field or custom table, the API will be able to access it. So that's an important feature. And also, this part I think also is maybe people are familiar, but worth repeating, because I think this may be, again, this is one of those advanced settings that I think Doreen and Stephanie know, but maybe not everybody knows, that when you have a custom table, so here the example that you're showing is just a field group, field directly, etc. But below that, let's suppose you create a custom table called, let's say, called manager notes or something like that. I was in a meeting and I asked somebody for an example of a custom table that they said, and they told me that the custom table that they have is speeding tickets. I said, I do not know what industry that is that you have a speeding ticket. So I do not know if they mentioned this as a joke, but I thought it's really stuck with me. So not only that you can create these custom tables, but then you can actually put them in other tabs here. Not only in the info tab, but you say, hey, this custom table pertains to performance reviews. So don't have it show up here, rather have it show on the reviews tab here on the left-hand side, because it makes more sense there. So you can do these kinds of things. So again, these are all a little bit of it we call HR sugar, right? It's a little bit of it. This is just, but it's very relevant. It's very relevant. You know, it could be a little bit of an icing, but more than icing, it makes people, because ultimately they're going to be in the HR system multiple times during the day. So having a little bit, making it a little bit easier every time, makes it makes a difference for them. And I think, Doreen, I'm sure you have come across a lot of examples of these custom tables or
yes. Oh yes, and it's one field we utilize quite a bit, because somehow every now and then a need pops up and you want to cater for it and track it, or there's a requirement that suddenly the regulator wants you to report on, and you want to be able to easily provide that. So you create that and then track it and generate reports of that. So it's one feature that we utilize quite a great deal in my organization.
Okay, and then let's go on and to the next slide. I think it's repeating some of the same things that we've just been talking about. So I think we can sort of go further, but here basically just to say that the updates to the system, sorry, just one more moment on the previous slide here, just to say that you can report off of the data, you can get real-time analytics, and then you can use the API access to get it. And then when you make changes to it, it's going to show up here in an important aspect here. From a business outcomes perspective, let's just make sure I know we have a couple of more things, but from a business assets perspective, all the reports that generally people drive, they have that specific business objective in mind here. So for that reason, that you make some change in the system, the report gets updated right away. Becomes a big. We do see a lot of customers who also do slightly different. Again, this is not a question of right or wrong, just a question of what works. Some customers take the data, they have the nightly process that connects to their own Tableau, Power BI, the other reporting tool. And I'm sure that there is an advantage to doing that as well, because they're already doing all the BI work there. There's some advantage. But then the disadvantage is that there's a little bit of a data delay. And if that's okay, then that's perfectly fine. If that's not okay, then use it. Okay. Let's just move along. Sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
No, just a good example, as we go to the next slide, a good example of how we utilize this is that, going back to this being the system of record. So we had a system that uploaded our web data every night. So our content management system for the website. And so it knew when a new hire came on board that person's name was going to go onto the website with their bio and with their information, their title, those kinds of things. Also, when someone was leaving the organization, the API would upload overnight, and that person would come off of the website. That's just one example. When IT was setting up their network access and things like that, the system said that they knew when they were coming on board, they knew when they were going off board. And it was just really helpful to be able to factor in all of those other processes into relying on our system. And they didn't have to go, oh, is he quitting today? Is he quitting tomorrow? Is he starting today? Is she starting tomorrow?
And of course, a lot of this extends to documents as well. That you have a document, but then you make the document available to a certain people by a certain folder. That's a big part as well, that you can, for each document, you can then ascertain who is the right set of audience to do that. Let's move along, Neha, just in interest of time here. I think a couple of more points we want to make. The org charts, I think, sorry, Doreen, yeah, if you want to take this one on. The org charts, again, always a big thing, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I think it's beautiful that the system automatically reports it, and so it's not. When I first started my career, you actually needed to request to see the org chart, but not anymore when you have a system. And so once the reporting lines are accurate, the org chart automatically populates itself. And I like the fact that you can drill down to specific units and see what's happening in the space and what the reporting lines are. I think it's also useful for large organizations where people want to see what the possibilities are within the space, to say, okay, these are the reporting lines, but also this is the possibility of growth to move from this level to the other level. So it's just that access to information that gets people into that feeling that you can trust the space. It's critical. Yeah.
And here, I think a couple of different things here. If you go to the next slide, Neha, like this, the fact that people can add like solid lines, dotted lines.
True.
That's an important thing. And then you can actually, in the permission structure, you can use this solid line and dotted line to say, hey, we want to give people the permission to view and manage the financials for the people who are their solid lines only, or solid line plus dotted line, things like that. So that depending upon the processes within your organization, this becomes a useful construct there. Also on the org chart. Sorry, go ahead.
It also does from a performance standpoint, right? Because then you can set up performance appraisals where the solid line is responsible for it, but they can get input feedback from the dotted line, and you can prioritize how that happens.
Exactly. I think just there are a couple of more things we want to talk about, but perhaps if you go to the next slide there, we have the segmented permissions. I think we have already discussed well enough that for each custom field, custom table, document, you can segment the permissions. So I think a lot of people are, because also this section is pretty visible to them, so I think they're quite familiar. So we won't really go into the details of a job profile, job design here. There are a lot of details into it here. Job group, so you can create your job groups, job family, job profiles, job titles. You can create reports off of those things here. So probably we won't go into it. There's another webinar coming a few weeks down the road where we will talk about that. But this is important enough to kind of just make sure that if you're using job profiles, not in a very structured way, job profiles can give you that central piece where you can both feed the employee data as well as your hiring data, as well as so kind of your master plan that you create for an employee record. This is that useful, and I think Doreen, Stephanie, you guys have used this part very well. So I think you could probably highlight also why this is important quite significantly for them.
So for budgets and things like that, so you could tell, like, if in this job profile, we are going to put this much of our compensation budget or this much of our bonus budget toward this particular job profile. So finance could actually see that if that job profile, the number of people in that profile grow, it can affect the budget, those kinds of things. Absolutely.
Exactly, and the budgeting would be sort of be covered in another one where we can kind of create a budget for 2024, 2025, saying, okay, these are by, and the organizations try to create budget different ways, by job profiles, by job titles, by specific individuals, but job profiles is a core component of that as well here. I think that's pretty much what we have here, right, Neha? I think maybe there's a slide on mobile, but let's go into Q&A and see if there are questions that we should like to take on here.
Okay, let's go to the question now. We've quite a bunch of.
I can see some of the questions. I'll try to take them on here. So if you go to the mobile slide, because I didn't cover it, maybe Stephanie, if you want to mention it while I look at the Q&A here.
Yeah, this just shows that we have access to our employee records when we're out. You know, if you're the head of HR and someone quits and the manager is telling you that you need to collect their hiring bonus back from them, and you're on vacation or you're, playing golf, I wish, and you can say, no, don't submit to the pressure. Let's look at this guy's offer letter. Look, he's quitting within the time frame, or he's quitting after the time frame. We don't owe him his recruitment bonus back, or we do. It can just be really helpful for you to have these kinds of things on the fly. Or, God forbid, as Doreen mentioned, lost an employee, right? And it's the weekend, and you need to know who's employees' family members, because you need to make sure your CEO reaches out to the family and provides condolences. Those kinds of things are available.
So there are quite a few questions. I know there's not a whole lot of time, but I'm going to quickly try to run through at least 2 or 3 of them we can go through. The first question I'm going to get to is, unfortunately, Lena has left. I think she has a question, but I will do it at least in the recording. She can see it. The question here was, what role do they see the automations play in reducing the administrative burden? Both in, I think the word automation here is probably ambiguous. It could be used many different ways, but yeah, Stephanie, if you want to add some, respond to this one.
So how the automation reduces administrative burden? Yeah, so being able, Aminda, you referred to it earlier. So if everyone gets a raise on the January 1st of every year, you push one button and everybody gets that raise, and that raise then is fed into the finance reports and into whatever. The same thing I mentioned before, when you have people coming on board or off board, helping communicate that information to IT, to administrative services. So there's a desk set up, our system set up where we, 2 weeks before someone came on board, there was a report that went out to administrative services, those kinds of things. So when someone arrived, there was a desk, a nameplate, supplies on their desk, a computer, those kinds of things. So it takes away a lot of those manual processes. If you change health vendors and everyone is in Delta Dental or in whatever system, you can go do a quick report and send one email to all of those people that says, hey, effective September 1st, we're not going to have this provider anymore. So there's a lot of things like that that can be helpful in terms of automation and efficiencies for sure.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of features inside HR also that kind of do that. Specifically, there's a feature section called automation itself, which can do that. There's one question here. I think, Doreen, this might be referring to you, something that you pointed out earlier. So Sam asked this question is, how do you strike a balance between maintaining detailed employee records and also respecting their privacy concerns?
I think that's a beautiful question. I think there's data that you require legally from an employee, but there's also rules on data protection and privacy that differs from country to country. And so as a human resource head, you must be aware of what's legal, what you can collect, and how you're utilizing it. It's actually in the data privacy laws, how long you can store that data when the employee leaves. So it's knowing what's legal to collect, and what you utilize it for and how you store them. So we do not collect data for data collection's sake. You're collecting data because you're paying people, their tax implications, their pension implications, their health implications. There's reaching out to people in the event that something happens to you. And that's why for some of them, we actually will ask you to do that. And for some of the data that you actually collect on colleagues, when you need to go to a third party to verify, the colleague actually has to give you permission to do that. So all of this is done in a very legal framework so that you're not contravening any laws.
Last question, I think that's the last question we'll have time for. I think it's also related. Maybe we could have taken it together if I'd read this one earlier. So Michael is asking, how can organizations, multi-country organizations especially, ensure that they're compliant with the relevant organizations when it comes to maintaining the employee records? So I think here the question, I mean, you can address whatever part, but one of I have heard some similar questions in the past is that the headquarters is in one country, the employees are in another country, the data privacy laws could be somewhat different. Usually they're not contradict, but they how do you handle it? And I think this questioner maybe might have that multi-country, that specific example in mind, but that's how they phrased it. So Doreen, how have you normally addressed, because you've also been part of a lot of multi-country, especially with Africa.
True. Typically, the requesting organization or the requesting body or head office, for lack of a better word, will tell you why it's needed. So, for instance, if they need to report on particular details within one of their countries, they will let you understand why. And so in collecting that from colleagues, you want to let them understand, okay, this is not in the Ghana data privacy laws, but in, say, South Africa, we need this to be able to stay legal. And so that's why we're collecting it. Often people just want to know why you're collecting the data, what it's utilized for, how it's preserved, and who has access to those. And so if you can assure employees or colleagues of all of those, then it's not difficult to get the information and utilize it. It's when things are done in the dark and there's no trust. Why do you suddenly want this? Are we not contravening the Ghana data privacy laws? But we're an organization that sits, let's say, from a mother country in the UK or a mother country in South Africa, and the laws are different. So we cite what laws that mandate us to collect that data, and then we go to employees for that.
Great. I think that's all the Q&A time we have. There were a few more questions. We couldn't really get to it, but a real pleasure, as always, speaking to you, Doreen, speaking to you, Stephanie. Thank you, Neha, for putting this together, keeping us to our time here. Thank you really very much for that. Thank you, Doreen. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining the event. We'll be sharing the slide deck and the recording in 3 days' time. So hope you get it soon. And thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, good evening, everyone.
Bye. Have a good afternoon and good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.